Welcome to the Startup to Exit podcast, where we will bring you world-class entrepreneurs and VCs to share their hard-earned success stories and secrets. This podcast has been brought to you by TIE Seattle. TIE is a global nonprofit that focuses on fostering entrepreneurship. TIE Seattle offers a range of programs, including the Go Vertical Startup Creation Weekend, TIE Entrepreneur Institute, and the TIE Seattle Angel Network. We encourage you to become a TIE member so you can gain access to these great programs. To become a member, please visit www.seattle.tie.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of our podcast from Startup to Exit. My name is Gauri Shankar. I'm on the board of TIE Seattle, which produces this podcast. My co-host Shirish Natkarni, who also serves on the board, is a serial author and has 2 books already published, and you can get them wherever books are sold. The first book called From Startup to Exit, and we shamelessly borrowed that title to name our podcast. And the second one, Winner Takes All, is all about marketplaces. We both have been doing it for a while and have talked to great many folks. And today's guest is yet another Seattle gem that we're going to talk to, and I think all of you will enjoy learning his views about startups and how to evaluate your ideas. But hopefully all of you will spread the word, subscribe, and follow us wherever podcasts are published. We are available on all platforms. With that, let me hand it over to Shirish to kick off the conversation. Shirish?
Yeah, thank you, Gauri. So very pleased to welcome Jay Bartot to our podcast. Jay is a really good friend and partner at Madrona Venture Labs, which is one of the leading incubators here in Seattle. He's a serial entrepreneur, started several successful companies, and is now spending a lot of time at MVL, playing around with LLMs, trying out different ideas for startups. And today's discussion will focus first on MVL and their model, how entrepreneurs can approach them and work with them to do their startup. And then would like to learn more about Jay's experience with LLMs and what he would recommend to startup founders. So welcome, Jay.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here and talking with you.
Great. So before we get started talking about MVL, maybe Jay, if you can talk a little bit more about your background and how you got to MVL.
Yeah, happy to. So I started out my professional career as a software engineer and moved out from the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest, and pretty soon after into my career, I sort of fell into working with startups, doing startups. This is around the time of mid 90s and the internet taking off, found myself moving around from company to company a bit, but gravitating mostly towards smaller companies. In 1996, I think, late 1996, I joined a startup called NetBot, which was a spin-out from the University of Washington Computer Science Department. We were commercializing some technology that some faculty were doing there. And it was the first venture-backed startup that I had worked for. And there I got introduced to, startups, the internet, and ultimately machine learning, which I really kind of, caught my eye, and I kind of got bitten by the machine learning bug. I'm not even sure we called it machine learning back then, but I think we were probably calling it data mining or predictive analytics or what have you. But I really could see the obvious usages for this kind of technology, and so I really kind of dove in and throughout the rest of my career, I've done a number of startups that I've co-founded, even before joining MVL, that were venture backed and were, ultimately very data centric and machine learning centric startups and products. Um, so, I like to joke these days that, I thought machine learning was really big 20 years ago. I was really must have been in my own bubble and kind of drinking my own Kool-Aid, but it's kind of interesting how it's sort of bubbling over the top now. And I'm delighted by all the advancements that have been happening. But I guess I didn't intend to ride this wave, but I've been riding it all along and really enjoying it.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. So let's talk about MVL. As we mentioned, it's one of the leading incubators here in Seattle. I think originally they started incubating their own ideas, but now they work with external startup founders as well. So perhaps, Jay, you can talk about your model. How do you work with startup founders? What kind of startups are you looking for?
Sure. So I joined Madrona Labs in 2016. I joined my partner, Mike Fridgen, who I had worked with at a previous startup, Faircast. And so he and I were old friends, both entrepreneurs. And, over time, we, slowly but surely built up our model and developed our model. And really, as a studio, had to find product market fit. Were we offering the right services for the right amount of equity for entrepreneurs and their needs here in the Pacific Northwest and in Seattle? So, that took some time and iteration. But, over time, we developed a model that has a little bit of variance to it. We have kind of a spectrum of models that we work with entrepreneurs, depending on what they need. So we try to meet on entrepreneurs where they are. We meet some solo entrepreneurs who bring us an idea, and they have good founder market fit for that idea. And so we help them with all aspects of starting their businesses, figuring out the technology angle and the product angle. Very importantly for our model, doing our homework on customer and market research. If there's one thing I've seen throughout my career, I've made these mistakes. I've learned from these mistakes. Sometimes entrepreneurs make mistakes again. But, it's really important to do your homework and figure out if there's a there for your idea. And do that before you take it. You don't want to find out later after you've raised some money and hired a team and so forth that the market's not big enough or the customer problem wasn't significant enough or what have you. So we really focus on those kinds of things early on with a founder or sometimes with our own ideas. Ultimately, sometimes the ideas are ours. Sometimes the ideas are those of the entrepreneurs we work with. But at the end of the day, we need an entrepreneur with strong founder market fit, a great team, a thesis, and all of that helping them get to a seed venture round of financing, so they can spin out of the nest and flap their wings wildly and go off on their own and do their thing and hopefully become great companies.
Got it. So, accelerators typically will take 6-7% equity, and then they'll also add a note on top of that, like Y Combinator or Techstars. What is your model? How much funding do you provide, if any? How much equity do you take? If you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a range. So I talked mostly about what I would consider our core model, where we have a team of 8 or so operators and experienced entrepreneurs, who work at the lab and work on, we all work on ideas together. The core model is really where we provide the most services, the most sweat work, if you will. Where someone like myself, who's a technologist, is doing not only technology vision, but also rolling up my sleeves and writing code and helping to develop the MVP. We have folks on the business side that help with market research and customer discovery and business model and business plan, all of those things. And so that's kind of the hands-on model. where we typically take the most equity for that, which can be, in the maybe slightly north of 20% range. We also occasionally encounter an entrepreneur who's a bit farther along. They have an idea. Sometimes they have a proof of concept or some nascent version of a product or something like that. And they need less of our help, less of our hands-on help, more of our guidance. And in those cases, we might take as little as 5 or 6%. We do mostly the core model stuff, but depending on the time period we're in and the fund that we're in, which is aligned with Madrona Venture Group's funds, we work with entrepreneurs across that spectrum.
Right.
We also always put some kind of money in. We refer to this as first money in, pre-seed, if you will. Typically 250K, sometimes a little bit more, where we get preferred equity for that on standard terms. And it's really important. I think it's a important value for the entrepreneur. And we learned this over time that you got to provide expertise and sweat equity services, but you also need to provide a little cash so that the entrepreneur can start hiring a team and get their company going.
And in that case, I assume you negotiate the valuation that you invest the funds at.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
Another part of our due diligence is feeling out the investor landscape for a particular founder and idea. And so, we're obviously have a very close relationship with Madrona Venture Group, but we also have a pretty extended network of investors from the Pacific Northwest and the Bay Area and the East Coast. And so, depending on what the idea is and what the space the idea resides in, we start talking to investors early. And start feeling out, what do you think of this space? What do you think of this idea? What do you think of this entrepreneur? So again, don't want any surprises later on. We really want to warm things up along a number of dimensions so that when the idea is ready, then it's everyone gets aligned and it's all ready to go.
So typically, as a result of that initial kind of feedback from Madrona, then Madrona gets assume interested, and then they will do a seed round of some kind and invest along with you in the company, along with other investors. That's typically the best outcome.
That's really what we strive for. That's the best outcome. Madrona doesn't always invest in our deals.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes our deals are outside of their thesis, or for whatever reason we couldn't find alignment. In which case, we'll look for another lead and other investors to come in on the syndicate.
Right. Got it. Okay. One of the things that you mentioned that you do is the market validation, and I understand is like a 3-step process that you follow. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What exactly that means?
Well, we have learned over time to do things in phases with milestones, and so typically what we really love is when a founder comes to us with strong founder market fit, meaning that they know the problem that they're trying to solve, they lived it, they worked in an industry where they experienced the problem. But also importantly, they experience the problem with other people who are still in the industry that they can leverage for design partners and pilot customers and things like that. And so hopefully they come to us with evidence around a problem and a need. But we want to validate as well. Again. We're entrepreneurs. We know the confirmation bias that entrepreneurs can experience. And we know how hard it is to really listen carefully when you're getting feedback from a potential future customer. And so I can recall some meetings I was in with entrepreneurs where we were doing a customer call and the entrepreneur pitched the idea to the customer. We got some feedback, and then after the meeting was done, I resynced with the entrepreneur, and they said, "Wasn't that great? They loved this." And I was like, "Were we in the same meeting?" So it's hard. When you're passionate and you're a builder and you're creative, you want to hear the things you want to hear. We can really help making sure that there's some objectivity in that.
Right.
The point of all this is that we want to go through these stages of sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 60 days, 90 days, but milestones to go through of are we hitting, are we learning what we need to learn, are we getting the evidence we need to get, and do we ultimately see a path to seed funding? And for some ideas we don't get there. We do the work, and for whatever reason, it could be that the problem isn't big enough. It could be that the market is not big enough. It could be that the entrepreneur we think is, for whatever reason, maybe not the right person to move forward with on a particular idea. And so, we want to be very careful about, making sure that we have the evidence when we get to these milestones and cut bait if we need to. Again, I alluded to this earlier, but the sooner you find out that something's not gonna pan out, the sooner everybody can get on to focusing on other things, and not finding out later that something's inherently flawed.
Right. When you do the market research validation, do you need to see a certain percentage of customers coming back and saying, "Hey, this is great. We'd love to be a beta customer of yours." Like you need to see, 7 out of 10 enterprises saying, that we want to get onto a beta. Do you want to see that kind of feedback?
Ideally, I mean, it depends on. We do mostly enterprise. By the way, enterprise AI is really Madrona's focus, and our focus. Sometimes that drifts off a little bit into, B2B to C or some variant of that. But ideally, we're finding such strong signal that there are folks we're talking to who can agree to be design partners early on. That's really the term kind of we're using as of late to, have a company whose problem is, strong and big enough, and our solution solves that that company is willing to at least dedicate their time. Perhaps they're not paying yet. If they're paying, that's great. But at least dedicate their time to, help develop the product in a way that ultimately solves the problem. I've learned that you can sometimes establish that there is indeed a big pain and a big problem, but that's not the bottom of the bucket. There's other things that can get into your way, even if there is a big pain. That can sometimes be, it can be challenging to realize until you're out there with a product in the market. But again, when we're learning a lot of these lessons, obviously across a lot of companies, and this is the kind of knowledge we can share with our entrepreneurs, so that they don't have to, go. Hopefully, we can keep them from stumbling.
Got it. Now, do you also help the founders with recruiting, creating the initial team?
Oh yeah.
Is that one of the functions you provide?
Absolutely. We have a very strong recruiting team, and a great head of talent, Sam Dorr. And again, this is something that we try to stack the deck early with. We think we have an idea, we think we have a founder, we think we have a space, or even sometimes before we have a founder, if it's our idea, let's spec out what an ideal founder looks like. Or if a founder comes to us, typically on the business side, sometimes on the technical side, but on the business side, sooner rather than later, we start thinking about who would be good for this idea, and how do we track them down, and how do we get them interested early.
Right.
So talent is a huge part of this.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, let's talk about one of the companies that you worked on, Ziteworks. You
Yes.
actually took time off to become the CEO of that company.
Yeah.
You were excited about the opportunity, but ultimately you had to find a soft landing for that company. It didn't quite work out as you had expected. Um,
Yeah.
can you talk about some of the less? Clearly, you've done market validation. Otherwise, you would not have jumped on board as a CEO and all that. So, what went wrong? And
Yeah.
like, why? Did you miss some signals, or were there some other problems?
Definitely. Yeah, I think definitely missed some signals. So, interestingly about Zeitworks was it was a project I worked on inside of Madrona Labs that I did feel strongly about. But the company actually spun out of the lab and raised money from Madrona Venture Group and a few others, and then operated independently for a year before running into some problems, some technology challenges in particular. Um, it was a hard problem, and the problem required certainly R&D, which I've done a lot of in my career. Where the first year or so of the startup is research and development, but also starting to put together a viable product. And this is the kind of classic like build and fly the plane at the same
Hmm.
time. So a challenging problem, and so I was asked to come in and help with the technology problem, which was appearing to the current team as possibly being intractable.
Hmm.
I didn't think it was intractable. I thought it was doable. I had thought that all along when working on it at the lab. Um, Ultimately, I stepped in as CEO, and we put a little team together and started working on the problem. And we ultimately found a technology solution. So it wasn't indeed a technology problem. Turns out there was a much harder go-to-market problem. Um, Enterprise product, so an enterprise sale. Um, Interestingly, what I found was that this was really a big dose of yes, there's the problem, but there's more steps to go through to get adoption and a sale. And so, in the case of Zeitworks, its product was invasive in the sense that you deployed into a bespoke, secure environment. So, we had desktop agents that would run on machines of people doing, business process work. And there was a number of points of friction there. As soon as we would get introduced to an operations person that was eager for the data to be able to optimize their team's performance or come in with an RPA solution, it wasn't long before we were in front of the head of IT and
Hmm.
CISO. Um, and being a young startup, an unproven startup, we hit a lot of friction there. And again, it's not that it's insurmountable friction, but it's friction that slows the process down, sometimes dramatically. And of course, a startup, time is everything. You only have a limited
Yeah.
burn rate, and you gotta get through certain
Yeah.
hoops in order to get on to the next stage. So the deceleration of the sales cycle, was really difficult. The other problem we hit that was more formidable than I thought it would be was the um, concept of surveillance. I think as a society, we're kind of in a weird place in terms of how we view technology that observes how we work and live. Um, we're all on the social networks that are out there. We know that our data and behaviors are being recorded and used for all kinds of different purposes. Hopefully, mostly to help us, find the goods and services we need. But I think that we're at a point where there's a lot of sensitivity around people feeling like their management is surveilling them. And so that was a pretty big point of
Hmm.
friction as well. Um, for what it's worth, I do believe to this day that employee behavior data is really kind of the last mile of really powerful data that can help
Hmm.
organizations optimize their
Hmm.
operations. But you have to be really careful
Right.
about it. And you know how you deliver your product and how you market your product and so forth has to be, very
Right.
sensitive. We just saw with Microsoft, for example, their
Oh,
was
sure.
it Recall was their product.
Yeah.
Uh, that because again, the hard technology problems, the behavior, employee behavior data on computers, it's very voluminous and
Yeah.
noisy data. Finding patterns in it is challenging, but with the advances in AI, we can kind of find those
Right.
patterns now. But again, that's not even though that can be a formidable challenge, that's ultimately
Right.
not the problem.
Right. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to understand. Yeah. Even despite the market validation, there's still things that you don't fully understand until you actually
Oh yeah,
go and start the business and start selling to customers
yeah,
and so forth. So that's good to understand. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we're as entrepreneurs, we're all influenced deeply by our experiences, and I can tell you that I'm skittish around enterprise ideas that are
Mhm.
invasive products that you deploy into bespoke, secure
Mhm.
environments. There's lots of problems in those environments, so it makes sense that entrepreneurs, who are familiar with those problems, are trying to build, but the go to market can be
Sure.
really hard and
Right.
difficult. Um, yeah, and it can be just very very
Got
very
it. Got
challenging.
it. One final question about MVL before we go on to your experience with LLMs is if there's a founder who has found a market fit or has an idea, etc. How should they best approach MVL? Is it through some common connection, or can they apply it
Yeah,
some on the website, or how should they best approach you?
sure. Yeah, we have a number of ways to interact with us. One of the great programs we have is called
Mhm.
Leap, and we have Leap events. Really, they're just networking events every other month, and typically 50, 60, 70 people show up. And we all go to them, and we all love working with and talking with entrepreneurs. So that's a great way to not only talk with us, but also to talk with other
Mhm.
entrepreneurs
Yeah.
in our network. Plus, we have a variety of programs that we offer on the website where you can submit a form, and if you have an idea or what have you, um, that's a good way too. I like going to local AI events, AI Tinkerers. Joe Heitzberg's event, monthly AI meetup event is I go to always faithfully, and I meet a lot of people there who have ideas brewing in their heads, and
Mhm.
so I like to think that we're very approachable. So I'm always telling people, if you want to grab a coffee, just reach out. Being an entrepreneur myself, I know how vulnerable people can feel when they have an idea. Idea, it's their creativity, and they want to share it with someone, but also get
Yeah.
constructive feedback. And I think that's really important.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Jay, on talk about MVL. Again, I'd encourage any entrepreneur thinking about doing a startup to really consider an incubator like Madrona Venture Labs. So with that, let me turn it over to Gauri, explore kind of the LLM experience that Jay has had at MVL.
Great. Jay, that was a fascinating story on Zyteworks. Even though you had all this experience, a long tenure as serial entrepreneur, still, when you actually roll um, into go to market, there's always the nuances that change the course of a company. Most of the time, I find entrepreneurs having a tough time to accepting that the headwinds are too much for them to stay on. And I think probably your experience helped that team a lot more than they might have realized, actually.
Yeah, well, I hope so. It's always, of course, hard and painful when things don't always go as we hope and plan.
Yeah.
We also have to be responsible to our investors, and do the right thing for them, and to the employees, of course, to hopefully land in a way that's best for them as well. So it's hard, but
Right.
that's what they say about startups, right? They're hard, and
So,
anybody who's been through this as much as I have is going to have some wins and going to have some losses, and both build experience and character.
great. So let's kind of dive first into the LLMs. I'm given your history with machine learning and where your journey started in Seattle. Um, is the are the LLMs what they're shaping out to be, or were you not that surprised, or you're extremely surprised? Is it just the compute came along and caught up with the LLMs? What's your initial reaction?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say because I followed, machine learning and used the state of the art machine learning in all of my startups along the way. Especially NLP technologies. I did a couple of startups that relied heavily on state of the art NLP. Um, but I think as we know, starting in 2012 or so, when convolutional neural nets really started radically changing the efficacy of computer vision and computer vision applications, it was pretty astonishing to watch. What I think is kind of funny is I remember reading pretty arcane statistical and machine learning textbooks in the early 2000s that I really wasn't educated for to read. I didn't have master's or a PhD in computer science or statistics, but I read stuff pretty aggressively and wrote some code where I could and there was one kind of machine learning technology I thought was really interesting. These neural networks. Well, these things look really interesting. I like the fact that they're biologically inspired, and it just seems really cool. So I, asked some people who were much more, educated in these kind of math and technologies, and said, well, what do you think of these neural nets? Those things don't work. They're toys. Stay away from them. At the time, support vector machines and naive Bayes classifiers and things were, more popular at the time. So it really did strike me when the compute did start to be there, the data did start to be there, where these neural networks popped up. And, I know there's lots of experienced data scientists out there who would still say, random forests or linear regression or logistic regression, especially in business use cases where explainability is important. They're still very viable techniques and methodologies, but, neural networks have really become the jolly green giant. In this field, and so when I watched computer vision, really get more and more powerful, myself and many others were wondering, well, like, when will natural language processing have its deep learning moment? And for a few years there, maybe 2016, 17, maybe into 18 a little bit, it was kind of like, we've got these word embeddings, which were an improvement over previous NLP techniques, but suddenly there was an inflection curve there too, and we started seeing these bigger and bigger models that turned into these what we know as large language models today. I just can't tell you how incredibly delighted I am with the progress, both on the language side and the image side. Even in the last 2 or 3 years. When I mentioned I returned to Madrona Labs in the late spring of 2023 and really started, playing with these things in a big way and experimenting with them, I was having these what I was calling falling out of my chair moments, where I would try something and just be like, "Holy cow! Like, wow, that's unbelievable!" Especially on natural language understanding. That was always the hard part, right? I mean, unstructured data, especially with language, was always really difficult. I built startups around this, and we banged our head against these problems. They were kind of worked, not really. Certainly couldn't parse and make sense of, just human dialogue and those kinds of things. It was very challenging there. And so to suddenly find these solved problems, these things were just, just a solution and an API call you could make was really astonishing to me and very, very exciting.
So let's unpack a few things of the many things you said there. So you played, I assume, with all the LLMs at this point, right?
Well, a lot of them.
A lot of them. Okay. So there's at the moment, at least, they're all in some fashion managed, controlled, operated by very big corporations, right? So resources is not the constraint any of them have. It seems like there's a lead that OpenAI, ChatGPT enjoys perceptionally over the others. Does your experience match with that perception, or is it more a perception that they have do they really have an early mover advantage in a resource plenty startup landscape for LLMs?
Well, I think that they have an advantage now, but it appears to be shrinking. We see regularly open source models being released, not just new models, but of course successive versions of existing open source models like Llama 3 and Mixtral and things like that. They're getting better and better, and they're getting better and better quickly. We can see that the big tech companies they're building giant models with lots and lots of data. I think the open source community is being more scrappy and figuring out how to take better data, smaller amounts of better data to train these so-called small language models that are maybe good at specific tasks and less generalizable, like something like ChatGPT 4. So I think we're seeing the space start to partition. And depending on what you're building, what kind of application you're building in particular, there's an increasing amount to choose from. And I think we'll start to see a lot of specialization. And I was rooting for the open source community, when all this got going. I've been an open source guy for a long time. I was on Linux in the 90s and built a lot of my startups on Java and Linux and so forth. And so sure enough, it's been amazing. If anything, the problem now is that there's so much technology, so many models being released that not one person could never hope to keep track of it all. Last time I checked a few months ago, there were north of 600,000 models on Hugging Face. So it's really an avalanche. And I can tell you that, trying to keep up with the technology and the technology advances has been really fun, but, sometimes it's overwhelming.
So is there a relationship with cost? I mean, do you see that the cost is dramatically going down as number of models increases, and the capability is also increasing, especially with open source getting a big boost with Llama?
Yeah, I do think cost is important, but I don't think it's the biggest factor right now, just because I think an overarching concept around Gen AI is literacy and adoption. And I think that even though many of us in the tech sphere are kind of in our own bubble around this, and we think the whole world is, thinking about Gen AI and using Gen AI for everything, I think actually we probably have a long way to go in literacy and adoption, both on the consumer side and within enterprises.
Got it.
So I don't think it's so much cost. I think that inference latency is more important, or it has been for me in the applications I'm building. The faster the models are, the more often I can use them. So, for example, if I have a real-time chatbot or a multi-agent chatbot, which is a particular project I've been working on the last 9 months or so, the architecture is really dependent on the latency of the models. So, one of the things we know everybody's kind of dealing with is unpredictable output from a model. I think one of the most challenging things about building production grade apps right now is that the model is completely delightful 85% of the time. That last 15% is really hard and frustrating. I call it cat herding. Um, and so if the models are fast enough, then there's times when you can have another model judge the output of a first model, and help beat down that kind of last 10 or 15%. But that can only happen if the models are fast enough. I'll give you a quick example here. I mentioned this multi-agent application I've been working on. It's in the travel space, and it's basically a virtual travel agency. So I have a flight agent and a hotel agent. I'll have a rental car agent at some point, and a few other auxiliary agents. But importantly, I have a supervisor agent, a manager that manages these agents. And so, in theory, the supervisor should be able to redirect or direct every message that comes in from the user to the appropriate agent. If you want to talk about hotels or flights or bookings or what have you. The problem is that that architecture is great, but it was too slow, and so the latency that the supervisor added just kind of made the product a lot less friendly and usable. And so we started exploring other ways to approach the problem, and started going down sort of a peer-to-peer route where each agent would get the last agent who handled the message would get the next message. If it wasn't appropriate for them, they'd move it to an adjacent agent, and that agent would look at it, and so forth. And so it worked better, but it was complicated. And so I was kind of frustrated, and I went on vacation. And while I was on vacation, I got an email from OpenAI saying we've released ChatGPT 4.0. And by the way, it's twice as fast and half the cost.
Yeah.
And so suddenly the supervisor pattern was viable. And so I think that these improvements, particularly around latency now, but cost will come into it down the line as demand for the products and adoption of the product scales. That can really affect how you build these things and what you can build.
So, two parts to the next question that you're going to jump off from what you just said. First part is entrepreneurs out there, right, who are coming up with ideas of building Gen AI. We've heard a lot of things saying, hey, they're all just wrappers around LLMs, and eventually OpenAI would do it. Quite possible. It could also be that there is still the enterprise problem that you have solved, except that the Gen AI makes it solve it more elegantly. Which of those scenarios you hear more as MVL saying, "Hey, I can do this." Okay, what's really you're doing versus, no, this is a problem. We're going to solve it, and this is the way we're going to solve it using LLMs.
Well, I think we from our perspective, we have a lens towards domain insight and domain expertise. Take the travel idea, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're using LLMs for solving problems in travel booking and searching and all of these things, and they're delightful and cool. As I've lectured a lot of young entrepreneurs over the years about machine learning, is that you may think you're working for a machine learning startup, but you're actually working for a data startup.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have no data, if you have no proprietary data, then you probably don't have much of a moat. If you have no domain expertise, that's often the source of a moat as well. And so I think that we're looking for ideas where domain expertise, access to data, maybe proprietary data or quasi-proprietary data, and also I think user experience is going to become more important. And the combination of those things, I think, are going to going to make certain apps really stand out from other apps.
Mm.
I think entrepreneurs for years have been talking about user experience and how they employ an iterative procedure, and they're always optimizing. And I'm not sure that a lot of that was really true. I think user interface and experience kind of fell by the wayside a lot of the time. I think we all think of products that we use on a regular basis that are, kind of crappy and not well designed. And so I think with Gen AI, the delightfulness, the ease of use of the experience is going to be more important than ever. So I look forward to seeing startups and large companies alike spending more time and resources there.
So let's take this the travel example and tackle the moat issue that Shirish and I have talked a lot about, right? So first moat, do you really have a moat that everybody could use the same LLM, just not only you? And then there's the others, that is, you have to assume that Expedia and say Booking.com are throwing vast amount of resources to defend their own legacy business, whatever that may be. And then here you're a startup that are convincing an investor, hey, I have an idea, it works on this LLM, and this would be the best next best travel agency that the world will experience. Which of those is defensible, and how do you evaluate ideas using that example you gave us?
Yeah, no, these are great questions because we've all been wondering about defensibility and LLMs. We got this great new capability, but you have it, but so does Sharish, and we all have it. And so it's definitely something that we're all thinking about. Again, I think it's really around a cocktail of access to data, relationships, domain knowledge. So it hasn't been announced yet, but we have a really great CEO for this travel idea who comes from the travel industry. I know of a couple of other travel startups that I see out there, and it's young kids who are technologists. And getting your hands on travel data is just, it's not something that's in a can on the street corner. And so having those relationships, knowing those people, is really important. And I think because of our CEO for this project, really gives us an advantage. On the whole, like, won't the big tech company just do this? Certainly, I think most entrepreneurs are probably most wary of the Microsofts and Googles and Metas and so forth. But as you start to drift out of that space into some of these verticals, I think startups have the advantage that they've always had, which is being able to move really quickly and be innovative and take a team of 6 people and build in 6 months what it would have taken another larger company, much larger company, I won't name any names, years to build and years to deploy. I think the paradigm shift with Gen AI is big enough that a lot of larger companies are going to be wary of disrupting something that they have that works. And I think that they'll be keeping an eye on what their young, spry competition is doing. Most likely we've seen these models before where there'll be consolidation later on, or who knows, or maybe some little travel startup will rise up and become the next Expedia.
The good news, Jay, here is that this particular technology wave has been democratized so quickly. I mean, essentially, every human on the planet has access to it, right?
Yeah.
In theory, and could write great poems, screenplays, and figure out what flights they should take. All of them have some level of capability, right? So now the question is, as you go into these verticals, like you're going into travel, looks like the same set of principles of a successful startup still apply. You still need a great operator, a great idea that can be validated with a market fit, go to market, etc. But the enterprises that also have access to this and could innovate are they going to get pressure from their own customers saying, hey, either you get on or I have to find a startup or somebody else that will do it? Because I cannot imagine any boardroom of any size, small to big, uh, is not discussing what is their Gen AI strategy. I bet that every board meeting has a Gen AI slide now saying, hey, what's our Gen AI strategy?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as you see these verticalization of LLMs into small language models and therefore applications, you do see that the basic principles are not changing, but of how a startup should execute. But you're saying the speed to market is still extremely important, even for OpenAI or your next travel startup.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm fascinated by where enterprises are right now with regard to Gen AI, because I think you're absolutely right. I know that boards and the street, in some cases with public companies, they're pressing CEOs saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And so I, have been having a lot of conversations, paying attention to the signal as we do customer discovery and research across a number of ideas we're working on. And clearly, enterprises are at a point now where they need to experiment with Gen AI, not just in their product lines, but also internally for their operational efficiency. Arguably, that's where a lot of companies will get their biggest bang for the buck. Um, and I can see a lot of enterprises struggling with that. Some enterprises have an experimental culture, some don't. The ones that don't have an experimental culture, I think, are probably going to become really vulnerable. The ones that do have an experimental culture are going to need to apply more resources to taking, some of their folks, some of their engineers, some of their business people, and giving them some time and freedom to think about how can we do this more efficiently. Geez, I saw somebody being able to chat with a PDF document. How can we chat with our PDF documents? How can I have an agent answer my email for me? Et cetera. And this is where a lot of the anxiety, I think, comes in too for folks, because they're worried about job loss and displacement. And this, going back to what I was saying earlier about Zeitworks, the other thing I that's really kind of come onto my radar that I've become sensitive to is organizations' fear of change. Um, there's a lot of change resistance in organizations, and when you offer a product or a data or insight into something that is fruitful, especially to the bottom line, it doesn't mean it'll be necessarily adopted, because it may mean change. It may mean somebody has to rethink about their organizational operation, and they're too busy just keeping the trains running on time. So I'm kind of fascinated by this whole, change thing and change resistance, and because there's a lot of change coming, I think, and I think organizations that really embrace change and embrace experimentation will be, the big winners.
Sure. So you early on alluded to, hey, 85% of the problem is solved, but still the 15% is tough. If you were to extend that, the same percentage mix, right? Seems like human assist will get people to be more productive. But the
Mhm.
question then becomes the security, right? Do I really need to pay somebody this much to solve this little of a problem? And it's going to be a cultural sort of conversation, and depending on the enterprise or the company, they will have different conversations. Because if you're going to say that, hey, all the domain knowledge is now shifted to a model or to a to the next gen AI, it may be just not quite true yet. It could be in the few years, but not quite true yet. The question then is, as you really said, is change, are you ready to embrace change? And I
Yeah.
think this sort of may point to leadership more than the employees
Yeah.
adopting anything. I think that's like, hey,
Yeah.
what are we trying to inculcate? It's working right now.
Yeah. Yeah, interestingly, I can remember working on machine learning solutions, years ago, where my board and my investors were asking, like, "Well, how well does this work?" And I'm like, it works great. Well, most of the time, it works great. Uh, sometimes we might need to have a human kind of look in on this. This is before we had terms like human in the loop and things like that. And sometimes there was a scowl of like, oh well, that's not scalable if you have humans in the loop. Interestingly, today there seems to be a new acceptance and tolerance of humans in the loop. It's almost comforting, I think, to a lot of people that the technology isn't so perfect that you wouldn't still want a person overseeing, with the ultimate domain knowledge and experience, influencing, what could be largely an automated system or an AI system. So sort of interesting that as culturally we went from being like this thing should automate everything to, well, maybe not everything. Let's keep some humans around just in
I
case.
think the human cognitive skills are way ahead of any LLM is
Yes.
at the moment, and at least in our lifetimes, the three of us here, I think there will be humans in the loop for many many decades to come. It's not going to get eliminated. I think
Yeah.
I probably may write a more elegant email in today than when I wrote maybe 5 years ago.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'm not so sure that that is the top of the line problem that you have to go after and solve. It's the question
Yeah.
of, recently when the CrowdStrike thing happened and the world was melting down, seems like some companies came back faster and others suffered. Others suffered very long consequences, like Delta Airlines was down for many days, etc.
Yeah.
And those are situations where I think a robust model could have helped their recovery, but they still
Yeah.
couldn't have prevented CrowdStrike. I mean,
Yeah.
it was totally out of their control. So,
Totally. Yeah.
the recovery is where it keeps coming. It's great to see that MVL is fostering a lot of Seattle entrepreneurs, and our community, our listeners are all, to be or entrepreneurs. And I'm so glad, Jay, that you're doing such great service to the community, and it's fascinating to hear how you are so curious. In your entire time you spoke, I could hear the curiosity in your voice. You're curious every minute. What can I find? Is there something here? And I think that's the most important thing. I hope every entrepreneur out there gets out of this conversation is curiosity is what keeps this thing going. Otherwise, it would be very boring and probably very painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, more so now than ever,
Yeah,
there's so many things to build.
yeah,
The question is, more so than ever, and you guys will resonate with this, is the timing.
yeah,
Um, it's easy for us techie guys to kind of see into the future. We just don't know the depth of the future,
yeah,
meaning that you know this no-brainer idea could be, now that the technology can support this no-brainer idea. Question is the public, are the enterprises ready for it?
yeah.
And getting that part right, I think, is probably even more tricky now than before, because again, there's so much stuff that's obvious to build now.
Great. Shirish, back to you. This was fascinating, Jay. We could talk for hours.
Yeah.
Maybe we have to
Oh,
have you back soon.
Yeah.
I can come back.
No,
Yeah.
thank you, Jay. This was fascinating. I have actually many more questions. So we definitely would love to have you come back and talk about how you're selecting different LLMs and all of that. But fascinating discussion. Do let us know when you have your virtual travel agent ready. We all tear our hairs out trying to plan our journeys. So anything that helps us in that regard would be amazingly helpful. So good luck with that, and
Yep.
love to see
Yep.
more startups come out of
Me too.
MBL. Yeah, great.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Great chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to our podcast from Startup Exit, brought to you by TI Seattle. Assisting in production today are Isha Jain and Mini Verma. Please subscribe to our podcast and rate our podcast wherever you listen to them. Hope you enjoyed it.